Thomas Babington Macaulay, a historian, orator, and British politician, was a man whose ideas would leave a lasting imprint on the Indian subcontinent. Born into a family of reformers, Macaulay was known for his sharp intellect and persuasive speeches, quickly rising through the ranks of British politics. He played a pivotal role in shaping colonial India's education system, which until then was a patchwork of traditional Indian schools and a few British-run institutions. Macaulay believed that education was the key to transforming society, but his vision was controversial and far-reaching. In 1835, as a member of the Supreme Council of India, he ended a fierce debate between Orientalists, who favored traditional Indian learning, and Anglicists, who championed Western knowledge. With his infamous Minute on Indian Education, Macaulay tipped the scales, arguing forcefully for a new direction. Macaulay insisted that British resources should fund Western sciences and literature, all taught in English, while abandoning centuries of Indian scholarship in Sanskrit, Persian, and Arabic. He dismissed Indian knowledge as inferior, believing that English education would create a class of Indians loyal to the British Crown. His persuasive manifesto led directly to the English Education Act of 1835, a law that fundamentally reshaped India's intellectual landscape. English became the language of administration, law, and higher learning, sidelining India's own rich traditions. Macaulay claimed this was a benevolent gift, a way to uplift Indian society. But beneath the surface, it was a policy designed for British convenience and control, ensuring a steady supply of English-educated clerks to serve the colonial administration. Understanding Macaulay's Minute is key to grasping how colonial rule moved beyond political domination to the colonization of the Indian mind, shaping identities, aspirations, and the very way generations of Indians would think about themselves and their place in the world. At the heart of Macaulay's argument was a calculated contempt for Indian knowledge, a perspective that would shape the course of education in colonial India for generations to come. He did not merely overlook Indian traditions. He actively sought to undermine them, believing that the wisdom accumulated over centuries in India was of little or no value. He famously claimed that a single shelf of a good European library was worth the whole native literature of India and Arabia, despite not knowing Sanskrit or Arabic, and without ever truly engaging with the vast and diverse body of Indian scholarship. This sweeping dismissal was rooted in prejudice, not in any genuine comparison or understanding. This was not mere ignorance, but a deliberate assertion of cultural superiority. Macaulay and his contemporaries positioned themselves as arbiters of value, dismissing centuries of Indian intellectual tradition as worthless, and refusing to recognize the depth and complexity of Indian thought. Macaulay ridiculed Indian learning as outdated myth and superstition, framing Western knowledge as the only path to progress. He painted Indian texts as relics of a bygone era, unfit for the modern world, and insisted that only Western education could lead to enlightenment and advancement. In doing so, he ignored India's remarkable achievements in mathematics, philosophy, literature, and the sciences, fields in which Indian scholars had made significant contributions long before the British arrived. Instead, he saw only what confirmed his own prejudices, turning a blind eye to the richness and diversity of Indian knowledge. True education values diverse perspectives and encourages critical engagement with different traditions. But Macaulay's policy enforced a single worldview, systematically erasing India's heritage from the curriculum and replacing it with a narrow Eurocentric perspective. By declaring Indian knowledge worthless, Macaulay advocated not just for the adoption of English, but for the forgetting and erasure of India's own intellectual legacy, a loss that would echo through generations, shaping the identity and self-perception of an entire nation. Macaulay's hypocrisy was clear in how he imposed a foreign education system on India. He argued Indians were incapable of choosing their own intellectual path, justifying the denial of agency and choice. The Minute dismissed the desires of the Indian populace, forcing English education as the only state-supported option. This contradicted Britain's own values of liberty and freedom of thought, offering no real choice to Indians. The system favored urban elites, excluding the majority, and creating barriers for most children. Macaulay's policy was less about enlightenment and more about creating a manageable, English-speaking administrative class. It was a tool for control, not a gift of knowledge. Macaulay's Minute openly aimed to create a class of Indians, English in taste and intellect, but Indian in blood. The goal was not knowledge for its own sake, but to manufacture loyal intermediaries for the British Empire. This new class would serve as a buffer between rulers and the masses, enforcing colonial rule and collecting taxes. The education system was designed to produce administrators, not independent thinkers. It fostered imitation and compliance, not innovation or criticism. The result was a divided society, with an English-educated elite alienated from their own culture. This was not an accidental outcome. It was the policy's central, calculated aim. Macaulay's hypocrisy lay in presenting this as uplift when it was really about subjugation. Macaulay's policy was driven by economic pragmatism as much as ideology. He saw education as an investment, arguing that only profitable knowledge, English education, deserved state support. Traditional learning was defunded, not because it lacked value, but because it didn't serve colonial economic interests. The curriculum was narrowed to produce efficient clerks and administrators, not well-rounded citizens. Macaulay's rhetoric of benevolence masked a focus on budget and administrative convenience. The system prioritized utility over enlightenment, training employees rather than empowering minds. In reality, it was a cost-effective strategy for managing colonial human resources. Macaulay's educational project was rooted in cultural arrogance and a belief in European superiority. He dismissed Indian civilization as stagnant, framing British intervention as a civilizing mission. His infamous claim about European libraries revealed a closed mind, judging India without understanding its languages or texts. The hypocrisy was stark. While preaching enlightenment, he enforced uncritical acceptance of British superiority. Students were taught to admire English culture and look down on their own, replacing education with indoctrination. This created a sense of inferiority among Indians, convincing them that progress meant abandoning their identity. Macaulay's system conquered not just land, but the self-worth of an entire people. Macaulay's education policy eroded India's cultural confidence, instilling an inferiority complex that outlasted colonial rule. By devaluing Indian languages and traditions, the system alienated generations from their own heritage. The English-educated elite became disconnected from their roots, more familiar with Western classics than Indian ones. Education became a tool for imitation, not originality, rewarding conformity to foreign models. This stifled indigenous innovation and critical thought, creating a dependency on Western validation. Even after independence, English's dominance continues to marginalize India's linguistic diversity. The struggle to reclaim indigenous knowledge and confidence is ongoing, a testament to the deep wounds left by Macaulay's vision. Rebuilding cultural self-respect remains a slow, challenging process. Nearly 2 centuries later, Macaulay's legacy still shapes Indian education and society. English remains the language of aspiration, perpetuating old hierarchies and debates over indigenous languages. Curricula often prioritize Western frameworks, sidelining Indian history and thought. The hypocrisy persists. Political independence has not erased intellectual dependency. Yet, a movement to decolonize education is growing, translating science into Indian languages, integrating traditional wisdom, and rewriting history from an Indian perspective. The battle is to build a system that celebrates diversity and fosters genuine intellectual freedom. Only then can India move beyond the flawed vision of its colonial past. Macaulay's educational policy stands as a stark example of colonial hypocrisy, dressed as progress, but designed for control. Under the guise of modernizing India, the British crafted an education system that subtly undermined local knowledge and values, while promoting their own worldview as superior. This was not just about teaching new subjects, it was about shaping minds to serve colonial interests. It imposed contempt for Indian culture, engineered social divisions, and prioritized British interests over Indian empowerment. The curriculum was carefully curated to create a class of intermediaries, Indians who would think and act like the British, but never truly belong. This legacy left deep scars, fostering a sense of alienation within one's own land. While English and Western science opened new opportunities and connected India to the world, the cost was a deep cultural wound and a persistent inferiority complex. Generations grew up questioning the worth of their own heritage, often feeling disconnected from their roots. The psychological impact of this imposed hierarchy still lingers today. The lesson is clear: education must never be a tool of domination, but a force for liberation and self-confidence. It should empower every child to embrace their identity, think independently, and contribute meaningfully to society. True education uplifts rather than suppresses the spirit of a people. India must build an educational framework that is globally connected, yet rooted in its own traditions. By blending the best of global knowledge with the richness of Indian culture, we can create a system that prepares students for the future while honoring the past. Only by shedding the colonial mindset can we nurture citizens who are confident, critical, and creative. Our youth must be encouraged to question, innovate, and take pride in their heritage, forging a new path forward for the nation. True independence means exorcising Macaulay's ghost and fulfilling the promise of a liberated, enlightened India, one where every child can dream freely, unburdened by the shadows of the past.